I mean, 40 years back, 1984 is when you qualified as a chartered accountant. What prompted you to take CA as a degree at that point in time?
Well, my father was a chartered accountant. He was an influence in my life.
And I'm sure that time there was no internet and all for communication.
We used to go all the way to our institute premises in Colaba.
For Three Idiots देखी होगी तो मेरा बेटा engineer बनेगा. Was that the kind of feeling in your childhood?
I think my mind started firming up after class 8 or 9.
तो 1984 में CA बनने के बाद you were with Mr. Kapadia.
I jumped into my private practice.
Almost 20 years you were into practice. What was your specialization? How did you get your first client?
5 years as a sole proprietor, and then I promoted one of my employees as partner. We took over a very successful firm.
Joining us on this episode of Beyond the Degree is a very special guest. He qualified as a chartered accountant in 1984, that's 40 years back. Spending the first 20 odd years as a practicing CA, he moved on to KPMG and served there as his partner for almost 20 years and now serving as a senior advisor. He's on the board of various companies right now, including companies like Precap Financial Advisory Services. He enjoys his time these days as retired, almost semi-retired CA, enjoying with yoga, singing and reading. Please help me welcome a renowned chartered accountant, Mr. Hitesh Gajaria. This episode is powered by J.K. Shah Classes. Welcome to this episode of Beyond the Degree. Thank you so much for accepting our invite and being part of this.
Thank you for having me as your guest.
Quickly, sir, I mean, 40 years back, 1984 is when you qualified as a chartered accountant. What prompted you to take CA as a degree at that point in time?
Well, my father was a chartered accountant.
Okay. Nice.
So from an early age, he was an influence in my life. He served his entire career almost in one company, India Steam Navigation Company at that time. And he inspired me to do chartered accountancy. He made me go to our principal, J.K Kapadia, who was the first president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. And seeing Mr. Kapadia was an awesome experience. I decided there and then that I would be a chartered accountant, and not only a chartered accountant, I would always be a practicing chartered accountant, and which is what I have thereafter pursued.
I mean, that reminds me, if Three Idiots देखी होगी तो मेरा बेटा engineer बनेगा. Was that the kind of feeling in your childhood that you always wanted to become CA, or it was a natural progression towards it?
No, I think my mind started firming up after class 8 or 9, where numbers always used to fascinate me. In fact, I used to always top the maths subject in my school. And there somehow there was a natural affinity to numbers. And therefore, when I used to see my father going through the annual accounts and preparing the schedules and, making sure the balance sheet was perfect, I think that also may have played a role in my early formative years.
Interesting. So I know you mentioned that you were not a very studious at that point in time, and you enter CA, you just managed to scrape through. So tell us something about your.
I'll tell you, frankly, I think one of the downsides of articleship is that you somewhere lose focus on what you actually are here for. An article student's first dharma, if I call it, is to clear the examination at the first attempt. Somewhere we got a bit distracted. The clients treat you with so much respect. You think you think no end of yourself. And somewhere you neglect your studies. Yes, in my intermediate chartered accountancy, I perhaps was the student who was the luckiest. I secured exactly 50%, which was
Wow.
the uh, percentage necessary to pass.
Yeah.
But then when I saw that result, I vowed to myself that never again I will be in this situation. So thereafter, I really focused. In fact, for my final, because I had credit leave, almost 5.5 months I put in, and I got a rank in my final CA in the first attempt. So I think that was a wake up call into CA.
So a transition from a 50% passing marks to a rank holder in your CA final. I mean, typically the joke say goes around is that people are very studious in their school days in 10th, 12th, and you are bored of topping the classes, so you become CA so that you know what failure means like. But you turn the story around. I'm sure you spoke about the fact that the results were not very happy. You're not very happy with how the results came out. दिख नहीं रहा था अच्छा. But was there anything else that motivated you, your friends around, or something that brought that change and being disciplined to get there?
No, I think what really worked for me was that when I went to my principal with my result at that point in time, he gently sat me down and said, "Look, you had a very narrow escape. You are a bright student, and make sure that you don't use your brilliance to be your handicap." Because I think students, no matter how brilliant they are, chartered accountancy teaches you that
To
there is
become
no
humble.
shortcut, right? You have to put in the hours, you have to master your subject. And CA is one degree which not only helps you clear the exam and earn a living, but actually it prepares you for life itself. So I think that was a change. And then, as I said, I was myself very, very relieved that I had passed at the first attempt, and I wanted to ensure that I would never be in that situation where I would not know whether I would pass or not pass. So by the time I gave my final and last paper, which was incidentally costing,
Okay.
which J.K. Shah Sir taught us,
Okay.
I knew that I had cleared the exam. And I
Okay.
remember that in those years we had 9 papers. We had one exam in the morning, one exam in the evening, and without a break.
Oh wow.
Right.
I
So
mean, these days giving 8 exams or 6 exams across 14 days is a tedious task, and that's a very different
it was a very
story
different
too.
atmosphere. We had 3 groups, we had 9 papers, and some of these were 50-50 marks. So maths and stats was 50-50 marks, etc. So we had a total, I think, of 10 or 11 papers. And to give that back to back was very exhausting. But I think in a way it helped because you are all geared up. 5.5 months I had put in. So in fact, I feel sometimes that the longish breaks in the middle slow you down, or somewhere change your whole focus.
Yeah, I think the students today look at more, they try to revise a lot of the last minute, but always the question is if you have not studied for the last 3 or 4 months, what's going to change in one day before that?
I think that never works. Frankly, people try and mug up at the last minute. In chartered accountancy, at least
You
I've seen
can't,
it
you
doesn't
can't,
work.
you can't do that. And that was a very interesting point you mentioned that your principal sat you down and he spoke to you and he believed in you. I think that's a very interesting part of the CA curriculum where you have a mentor in your early professional days itself, where your principal generally guides you practically and also in examination and somewhere in your life journey as well, which you do not normally find in the early age in any other course and career. And something, of course, I believe also is that if someone is betting on you, you put in 200 effort because you're not only putting for yourself but for someone else. Someone else is also betting on you. So, anyone else apart from your mentor who was
So
there
let
in your
me
religion?
let me tell you this, Hardik. Chartered accountancy is such a beautiful profession. And I don't think this happens anywhere else. It's not only during your early examination days, but as soon as you pass, if you are fortunate to join organizations such as Bombay Chartered Accountants Society or Chamber of Tax Consultants, senior chartered accountants virtually handhold you through your entire practicing career. Even today, there are very many senior chartered accountants who I frequently discuss some tricky areas, etc., and they are never hesitant to share their knowledge and experience. I don't think any other profession in India and perhaps in the world, such as chartered accountancy in India, where professionals actually share their knowledge and are interested in you coming up in life rather than, ensuring that you remain
You
subdued.
remain. So I think while we talk about competition, we don't look each other's competition. We look at collaboration because that's how we learn knowledge. The curriculum or the scope of a CA is so vast that there is so much everyone else will know, which I may not know even today.
True. True.
So let's rewind a little back. वापस जाते हैं exam की तरफ. It was 1984 when you gave your CA final examinations, and that is when 31st October के बीच में आपकी exams भी आ रही थी. How was the environment at that point in time, and were you still
Oh, so it was a very unique exam. If you recall, on 31st October
yeah,
1984, our then Prime Minister was assassinated.
that's right. Yeah.
So there were then riots, and the whole exam was pushed back by about 18 or 19 days. And I think we began in November 18th or 19th, I remember. And then the exam results were also delayed by about 15 days. So obviously, that put off a lot of people because when you've studied for 5.5 months. So I know for 3 days actually, right till 3rd November, I didn't touch my books again because I was geared up to give the exam.
And a lot of uncertainty on when the exams will happen, or will they happen immediately or not.
Absolutely, I mean,
And I'm sure that time there was no internet and all for communication. के exams कल हो गए परसों हो गए. We can't make a general announcement. A lot of
no,
rumors will be
we used to go all the way to our institute premises
to
in Colaba,
to
Cuff
find out
Parade, to find out whether the
exam हो रही है, नहीं हो
yes,
रही है.
and then we were 5 or 7 friends. All of us used to take turns to
अच्छा,
go, one day
जाके
because
देख
we
के
were all in Mumbai suburbs, and Cuff Parade was quite a distance, even by
True.
train to go to.
Obviously, yes, it is.
So interesting days.
Interesting, dude. So you did your part of your coaching from J.K. Shah classes. It was the first batch of J.K. Shah Sir. How did you hear about him, and what was your experience with him?
So actually, I did not know J.K. Shah then at all. I was part of, and I had enrolled for Usha classes. Damani sir was the principal, and he was fairly well known among chartered accountants for professional coaching. And that year, costing was a subject which was offered for the first time. And lo and behold, J.K. Shah sir took his first class in
Right.
Usha classes, and I was a student then of
Oh,
Usha classes.
okay. And that's how you got in touch with him,
Correct.
and that's been your costing journey.
Oh, absolutely. And I think not only costing, incidentally, I scored extremely high in costing, but that's not it. I think there was this unique quality of Mr. J.K. Shah that he didn't prepare you only for the exam. I think he taught us one fundamental thing, that when you are, confronted with a huge and complex problem, the first thing you do is you break down the problem into its constituents. Once you start breaking down and addressing each constituent, then the entire problem can be solved. So I
That's a
think
life
that's one
lesson.
learning which has stayed with me forever,
Yeah.
whatever be the scenario or the setting.
Correct. That's a life lesson. अगर बहुत बड़ी problem is, break it down and solve one problem at a time. It will become easier for us to figure that out. So tell us something more about your articleship days. कभी ऐसा लगा between your classes, examinations, and articleship that this course is too grueling? This is not for me.
So I think what I was very clear, and our principal also insisted, was that he would never give anyone any articleship until and unless he had passed his BCom examination.
Okay.
So I started my articleship only after
After
that. And even
graduation.
today, most people don't follow this advice. But my advice always is finish your college properly and only then jump into the profession and articleship. So it was not very tough for me because it was the articleship. We had fairly luxurious hours, I would say, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Not a minute early, not a minute later.
Okay.
And therefore, morning classes or late evening classes were possible. Besides our principals, our entire seniors that we had, even today, I have a great relationship with some of the seniors who were ahead of me in chartered accountancy, who actually handheld us through all those years. So it was really joyful days.
Oh, that's interesting. I think, when your team and environment atmosphere is good, it becomes easier for us to, appear for the examinations as well. तो 1984 में CA बनने के बाद you were with, Mr. Kapadia.
No. I jumped into my private practice. straight away.
Before during articleship.
No, no. After articleship,
Okay,
during articleship, I did it in GP Kapadia and
correct.
Company. I passed the examination on 31st of January 1985. I got my COP on 13th February 1985, and I was in practice from 13th February 1985.
So your father was in service. What prompted you to take up practice?
So I think one of the things which always fascinated me was that I wanted to be an entrepreneur in my own right. I did not want to be dependent on any employer to earn a livelihood from a very early age. And I think that's why I straight away jumped into private practice.
So almost 20 years you were into practice. What was your specialization? How did you get your first client?
So, 1985 to 2001, 16 years, I did my own practice for the first 5 years. I as a sole proprietor, and then I promoted one of my employees as partner. I teamed up with a friend as a partner, so we were three partners. We took over a very successful firm, Kanudoshi Associates. We
Okay.
ran that firm for at least 10 years, very, very beautifully. And then KPMG made me an offer I couldn't say no to.
Okay. Okay. So that's interesting. So now from practicing chartered accountant to a big four organization. Not a very common transition that we see, these days. So what was the prompt at that point in time? Was it financial? Was it more from a larger exposure? Something
So I'll tell
else?
you, frankly, I was pleasantly surprised when KPMG made me that offer. I still recall going for a meeting with the then head of tax, Bharat Raut, and he's sitting me down and saying, "Look, I'm offering you partnership, but we want you to come." I was really surprised because it was rare that from a non Big Four environment, somebody would be straight offered a partnership in a Big Four.
Correct.
I considered it hard. In fact, it took me almost 2.5 months to make up my mind. But what actually prompted me thereafter was that knowledge, I realized, is very volatile. You know something, unless you are able to apply it, it vanishes. So while I was always keen in newer areas like taxation of non-residents was the first area where very few chartered accountants were in practice.
Practice.
So I jumped into that field. Foreign Exchange Regulation Act at that time, FERA, was an area of interest, and I had lovely mentors in both those areas. Even
Okay.
today, they look at me very affectionately. They are very senior chartered accountants. And therefore, KPMG gave me that platform and those types of clientele to apply that knowledge. That was the driver. And you may find this very strange, but I had not discussed my compensation with Bharat Raut before joining them.
Okay.
I got to know this much later, after almost 10 months of my being in the firm, where one day Bharat said, this is what, is your compensation for the year. And I just said, well, thank you.
So I think sometimes global organizations give us exposure which possibly a smaller company does not give us, and I think that is one very interesting prompt, that transition that happened from practicing CA to a big four. How was the initial culture out there? I mean, it's a work culture out there. And 2000s is pretty early for big fours also. They were just stepping their stone in India and building their presence. So how was the work culture and all at that point in time?
So actually, it was very friendly atmosphere because we were very, very few partners, but we were still a large number of people overall. We were in 4 cities. We were 700 people almost. I think I was partner number 20, and we were a growing organization. But the culture was very nurturing, and I would credit Bharat Raut for engendering that culture in KPMG Tax. I also learned a lot from other advisory partners because they had come from a background, from different backgrounds in Big Four. Like Anderson was another
Arthur
company they
Anderson.
had come from. They had worked overseas in KPMG offices, and then they came to India. So one picked up a lot of nuances of how to behave, how to interact with people, what was the culture when you were trying to build clientele, etc. So, incredible learning. We also had very, very detailed formal training, not only on technicals, but even on things like etiquette,
Okay.
language, culture. If you have a Japanese client, what is
How do you be?
expected? If you have an American client, what is expected? Incredible learning, because I think KPMG put in a lot of effort into training. Uh, and the simple reason is because we came in the last. KPMG was the last of the big four
Big
in
was to come in
India.
India.
We were the youngest, we were the smallest. And I think we've had all the freedom to put in place whatever training culture and atmosphere, ambience, whatever we wanted to put in. I recall Kamla Mill's office was one of the first offices in
This
the then early redeveloped mills
of
area
Mumbai.
of Mumbai, and it was incredible. It was eye opening. There was this huge mill which was transformed into a magical workplace. Those were really, really happy days.
Really good day. So I mean, I can relate to some of the spots. I did 1 year of my articleship with EY, and I was with them for almost 2 years after that. They look at very small things like how do you staple a paper also that's easier for anyone to turn around and read, or how do you make submissions in income tax department, how the attachments and extras go, how are they numbered. I also remember one of my first assignments I was working on, and I submitted that to my senior for review, and she was like, "Hardik, it's a brilliant job done." And then she made some 100 corrections on the paper. So, and then she explained that to me. So that was, I think, very interesting, where the Big Four spends a lot of time and focus in terms of training an individual, and that has helped me a lot even today in professional experience. कि कुछ चीजें ऐसे ही होनी चाहिए, because that is when you're giving respect to the other person spending their time as well out there. But since we're talking about Big Fours, and something has been in the news a lot in the recent past, is that the Big Four culture hasn't been that conducive for a lot of people today. You have spent almost 20 years plus, in a Big Four organization. What's your take on it? Is it culturally driven, or is it specific incidents which get blown out of proportion?
So if I step back,
Now, I think we also talk about the fact that the generations have been shifting. The Gen Zs that we call them these days, they have a very different work culture and mindset culture. What's your take on that?
I think this whole Gen Z is a little overblown. Human beings are the same.